Hello everyone, this is Anyman here to remind you that you have the power. And one of the tools that you can use in order to use that power is the C.I.A. manual on trickery and deception. It is an old manual that was published in the 1950s that has only recently, in 2009, been declassified. But the tools and techniques that it provides can be useful. So, without further ado, the official C.I.A. manual of trickery and deception. There's 3 names here. The middle name is blacked out. I guess they didn't declassify that part. But the 2 names that are listed are H. Keith Melton and Robert Wallace. This is published by HarperCollins eBooks. The contents include acknowledgments, a foreword by John McLaughlin, and an introduction, The Legacy of MK Ultra and the Missing Magic Manuals. Afterward, they have some operational applications of the art of deception. 1. Introduction and general comments on the art of deception. 2. Handling of tablets. 3. Handling of powders. 4. Handling of liquids. 5. Surreptitious removal of objects. 6. Special aspects of deception for women. 7. Surreptitious removal of objects by women. And 8. Working as a team. They have recognition signals, notes, selected bibliography, a section about the authors, other books by H. Keith Melton and Robert Wallace, credits, copyright information, and information about the publisher. We won't be reading through all of that, probably, but we will be reading through the first few sections, or at least the first half, today. You should pick up some important principles through this. Acknowledgements. It is unlikely that either John Mulholland or Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the C.I.A. officer who authorized the creation of some operational applications on the art of deception and recognition signals, ever anticipated that their manuals would become available to anyone without security clearances. Both men understood that their respective professions as magician or C.I.A. officer required oaths of secrecy. The magician's oath states, "As a magician, I promise never to reveal the secret of any illusion to a non-magician, unless that one swears to uphold the magician's oath in turn. I promise never to perform any illusion for any non-magician without first practicing the effect until I can perform it well enough to maintain the illusion of magic." Members of the magic community disavow anyone seen as betraying this oath, but also recognize the necessity to expose secrets of their craft responsibly to students and others desirous of learning magic. In his 2003 book, Hiding the Elephant, How Magicians Invented the Impossible and Learned to Disappear, illusionist and author Jim Steinmeier addressed the conundrum faced by those seeking to write about magic, yet still preserve its mysteries. In order to understand how Houdini hid his elephant, we're going to have to explain a few secrets. We'll have to violate that sacred magician's oath. In the process, I promise that there will be a few disappointments and more than a few astonishments. But to appreciate magic as an art, you'll have to understand not only the boldest deceptions, but also the subtlest techniques. You'll also have to learn to think like a magician. In his popular general market book of 1963, Mulholland on Magic, the skilled practitioner himself revealed many of the principles of magic that a decade earlier had been included in his operational manuscript for the C.I.A. The real secret that Gottlieb and Mulholland sought to preserve, however, was not of specific tricks, but that professional intelligence officers, not just performing magicians, would be acquiring the necessary knowledge to apply the craft to the world of espionage. In a sense, this book is the result of 2 historical accidents. The first accident is that of thousands of pages of research conducted under the CIA's decade-long MK Ultra program. To our knowledge, only 2 major research studies, Mulholland's manuals, survived CIA Director Richard Helm's order in 1973 to destroy all MKUltra documents. Mulholland's manuals are a rare piece of historical evidence that the CIA in the 1950s, through MKUltra, sought to understand and acquire unorthodox capabilities for potential use against the Soviet adversary and the worldwide communist threat. The manuals and other declassified MKUltra administrative material further reveal that many of America's leading scientists and private institutions willingly participated in secret programs they agreed were critical to the nation's secrecy. The second accident was the author's discovery of the long-lost CIA manuals while conducting unrelated research in 2007. Although portions of the manuals have been previously described, referenced, or printed in part, we were unaware of the existence of a copy of the complete declassified work, along with the original drawings and illustrations. Notable public references to the Mulholland manuals were made by magician historian Michael Edwards in a 2001 article, The Sphinx and the Spy, the clandestine work of John Mulholland, in C.I.A, the Conjurer's magazine, April 2001, a partial reproduction of Mulholland's first manual in C.I.A, volume 66, number 8, August 2003, and Ben Robinson's Magician, John Mulholland's Secret Life, library.com, 2008. That's spelled with a Y, by the way, instead of an I. Neither the CIA's library nor its historical intelligence collection contained a copy of Mulholland's manuals. When retrieved by the authors, the manual's text was legible, but the poor quality of photocopied pages of Mulholland's accompanying illustrations, drawings, and photographs required careful study to understand his original intent. To enhance the manual's readability, corrections to grammar, punctuation, and related errors that do not alter the substance of the original material have been made. We are indebted to HarperCollins editor Stephanie Myers for recommending Phil Frank as the illustrator, who has recreated the style and precision of the original images. The reader will find Phil's mastery of capturing human hand and arm movements, which are central to Mulholland's explanation of his tricks, to be superb art. From the first day we mentioned this project, Daniel Mandel, our agent at Sanford J. Greenberger and Associates, was an enthusiastic promoter. We are deeply appreciative for his personal interest in the subject by Steve Ross, then at HarperCollins, and his actions in making the project possible. Stephanie Myers provided excellent suggestions and guidance in constructing the overall work and seeing it through to publication. The HarperCollins graphic design team has created a distinctive cover that reflects the historical look and significance of the manual. While researching, writing, and rewriting the book, we received the daily good-spirited advice of Mary Margaret Wallace in typing and editing drafts that bounced back and forth between the authors. Consistent encouragement and well-placed suggestions and criticisms from Hayden Peake and Peter Ernest substantially improved our initial drafts. Tony and Jonna Mendez offered perspectives from their experiences that enabled us to translate many of the elements of magic from theory to practice. Additional appreciation is owed to Jerry Richards, Dan Mulvena, Nigel West, Michael Haskow, David Kahn, and Brian Littell, as well as Ben, Bill, and Paul for their insights and contributions. Susan Rowan served as our hand model and kept our spirits roused as the authors recreated each of Mulholland's original photographs as references for artist Phil Frank. John McLaughlin, former deputy director and acting director of the CIA, reviewed the manuscript to validate our use of magic terminology, as well as contributing the book's preface and administering the magician's oath to the authors. John is an accomplished amateur magician, and by virtue of his distinguished career at the CIA, is uniquely qualified to understand the rich overlap between the tradecraft of the intelligence officer and the magician. As Senior Research Fellow and Lecturer at Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies at the Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., he often begins presentations on strategic deception with demonstrations from his repertoire of magic tricks. Foreword by John McLaughlin, former Deputy Director, Central Intelligence. This is a book about an extraordinary American magician and his way of life intersected with American intelligence at a pivotal moment in its early history. John Mulholland was never a household word like the world-famous escapologist Houdini or, more recently, the illusionist David Copperfield. But among professional magicians from the 1930s to the 1950s, he was seen as the very model of what a magician should be: urbane, highly skilled, inventive, and prolific. He was very successful professionally, entertaining mostly in New York City society circles. He published widely on magic, both for the general public and for the inner circle of magicians who subscribed to the professional journal he edited for decades, The Sphinx. His impact on the art of magic was enormous. Mulholland's 1932 book, Quicker Than the Eye, was one of the first books I stumbled on as a magic-struck boy combing the public library in the 1950s. I fondly remember being transported by an author who seemed to have traveled the world and witnessed marvelous things I could only imagine. That's what fascinated me about Mulholland then. As a lifelong amateur magician who spent a career in American intelligence, what fascinates me about Mulholland today is the way the story told here resonates with something I came to conclude in the course of my professional life: that magic and espionage are really kindred arts. The manual that Mulholland wrote for the Central Intelligence Agency and that is reproduced here sought to apply to some aspects of espionage the techniques of stealth and misdirection used by the professional conjurer. Many may ask what these two fields have to do with each other, but a cursory look at what intelligence officers do illustrates the convergence. Just as a magician's methods must elude detection in front of a closely attentive audience, so an intelligence officer doing espionage work must elude close surveillance and pass messages and material without detection. In another part of the profession, analysts must be as familiar as magicians with methods of deception, because analysts are almost always working with incomplete information and in circumstances where an adversary is seeking to mislead them, or in the magician's term, misdirect them. Counterintelligence officers, people who specialize in catching spies, work in a part of the profession so labyrinthine that it is often referred to as a wilderness of mirrors, a phrase, of course, with magical overtones. Finally, there are those covert action specialists. In any intelligence service, these are the officers who seek at the direction of their national leaders to effect events or perceptions overseas, especially during wartime. Principles of misdirection familiar to magicians were evident in many of the great British covert operations of World War II, such as deceiving Hitler into thinking the 1943 Allied invasion from North Africa would target Greece rather than its true target, Sicily. This was the conjurer's stage management applied to a continent-sized theater. The manual Mulholland produced for the CIA does not read the way a book from experienced magicians would read. He is clearly addressing an amateur audience and takes care to explain things in the simplest of terms, yet he draws on the underlying principles of magic to explain how intelligence officers could avoid detection in the midst of various clandestine acts. A case can be made that Mulholland's instruction influenced the more mundane aspects of espionage tradecraft, how to surreptitiously acquire and conceal various materials, for example. As best we know, however, these methods he designed for more aggressive actions, clandestinely delivering pills and powders into an adversary's drink, for example, were never actually used. The fact that he was asked to contemplate such things is emblematic of a unique movement in American history. American leaders during the early Cold War felt that the nation existentially was threatened by an adversary who appeared to have no scruples. Mulholland's writing on the delivery of pills, potions, and powders was just one example of research carried out back then in fields as diverse as brainwashing and paranormal psychology. Many such efforts that seem bizarre today are understandable only in the context of those times, the formative years of the Cold War. These were also the formative years for the American intelligence community. It is important to remember that this was a very new field for the United States. Most other countries had long before integrated espionage into the national security toolkit. The Chinese strategist Sun Tzu had written about it in sophisticated terms in the 6th century BC, and older countries such as Britain, Russia, and France had been at it for centuries. While the United States had used intelligence episodically, it was not organized as a national-level effort until 1947, and our young country struggles still today with its proper place in our national security strategy. I doubt many intelligence officers today would recognize John Mulholland's name, but the essence of his contribution had little to do with notoriety or fame. It was in effect to help the nation's early intelligence officers think like magicians. Given the close kinship between these two ancient arts, that was a significant contribution indeed, and one that continues in stealthy ways that Mulholland will probably admire to this very day. Introduction: The Legacy of MK Ultra and the Missing Magic Manuals. Magic and intelligence are really kindred arts. John McLaughlin, former Deputy Director of Central Intelligence. In 2007, the authors discovered a long-lost CIA file, once classified top secret, which revealed extraordinary details of the agency's connection to the world of magic decades earlier. The documents, part of Project MK Ultra, shed light on a fascinating and little-known operation: the employment of John Mulholland as the CIA's first magician. An accomplished author and America's most respected conjurer of his day, Mulholland authored 2 illustrated manuals for teaching CIA field officers how to integrate elements of the magician's craft into clandestine operations. Due in part to the extraordinary levels of secrecy surrounding MK Ultra, the manuals were considered too sensitive to be distributed widely, and all copies were believed to have been destroyed in 1973. Footnote 1. Nearly 50 years after they were written, rumors of the existence of a long-lost copy of the Magic Manuals continued to fly through the corridors at Langley, but many intelligence officers thought they were a myth. Footnote 2. To understand the CIA's first magician and how his remarkable manuals came to be, it is necessary to recall one of the most dangerous periods in U.S. history. With its establishment in July 1947, the CIA received 2 primary missions: prevent surprise foreign attacks against the United States, and counter the advance of Soviet communism into Europe and Third World nations. Officers of the agency, as the CIA became known, would be on the front lines of the Cold War for 4 tense decades, fueled by nuclear stalemate, incompatible ideologies, and a Soviet government obsessed with secrecy. At home, the USSR's security and intelligence organizations, the KGB and its predecessors, cowed the internal population, and abroad they attempted to undermine foreign governments aligned with the West. The Soviet Union's successful testing of a nuclear weapon in 1949 caught the United States by surprise and created 2 nuclear powers competing in an international atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. President Eisenhower received a startling top-secret report in 1954 from a commission headed by retired General James H. Doolittle that concluded if the U.S. is to survive, long-standing American concepts of fair play must be reconsidered. We must learn to subvert, sabotage, and destroy our enemies by cleverer, more sophisticated, and more effective methods than those used against us. It may become necessary that the American people become acquainted with, understand, and support this fundamentally repugnant philosophy. The report affirmed a threat to the Western democracies from Soviet-sponsored aggression and called for an American offensive and defensive intelligence posture unlike anything previously authorized in peacetime. As a result, the CIA's covert action role expanded from Europe into the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and the Far East. Reflecting on those years more than half a century later, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger asserted that during the decade of the 1950s, only the United States stood between Soviet-led communism and world freedom. Footnote 4. Footnote 3. Footnote 4. Yeah. The CIA had been engaged in covert programs since its creation, and in 1951 formed a special unit, the Technical Services Staff, or TSS, to exploit advances in U.S. technology in support of espionage operations. One of TSS's first employees was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, whose degrees in chemistry from the California Institute of Technology made him a logical choice to head the handful of chemists in the staff. Initially, the chemistry branch created and tested formulas, or special inks, for secret writing that enabled CIA spies to embed invisible messages in otherwise innocuous correspondence. Footnote 5. To conceal the liquid disappearing inks, TSS reformulated the liquids into a solid form that looked like aspirin tablets and repackaged the tablets in pill bottles that would pass unnoticed in an agent's medicine cabinet. When a spy had information to convey, he would dissolve the tablet in water or alcohol to reconstitute the ink for his secret message. TSS supported other activities of the agency as well, forging travel and identity documents for agents who worked under alias names, printing propaganda leaflets, installing clandestine microphones and cameras, and building concealments for spy equipment in furniture, briefcases, and clothing. To those uninitiated in the craft of espionage, the secret work of the TSS scientists and engineers at times appeared to accomplish the impossible. In reality, this handful of CIA scientists was demonstrating the third law of prediction advanced by science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Footnote 6. Illustration, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, Chief CIA Technical Services Division, 1966 to 1973, by Phil Frank. Dr. Gottlieb and his chemists expanded their research during 1953 to counter another unanticipated Soviet threat. The 3-year-long Korean War had stalemated, and the alliance of North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union seemed on the road to mastering the art of mind control. Such a capability could render soldiers and possibly entire populations vulnerable to communist propaganda and influence. Reports reached the CIA about Soviet clandestine successes with mind control and newly discovered capabilities to brainwash, recruit, and operate agents with the aid of drugs. Footnote 7. Mind control appeared to allow the communists, using a combination of psychological techniques and newly developed pharmacological compounds, to remotely alter subjects' mental capacities and control his free will. Footnote 8. Despite limited research on similar topics during World War II and the early 1950s, the science underlying the reported Soviet successes remained a mystery. America needed to understand the scientific basis of mind control and develop safeguards and, if necessary, applications for its own use. In March 1953, Alan Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence, entrusted the 34-year-old Gottlieb with one of America's most secret and sensitive Cold War programs, codenamed MK-Ultra. Dulles authorized TSS and Dr. Gottlieb's chemical staff to begin work on multiple projects for research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. Footnote 9. MK-Ultra eventually encompassed 149 sub-projects and remained one of the CIA's most carefully guarded secrets for over 20 years. Footnote 10. Its projects aimed to understand how drugs and alcohol altered human behavior and to protect American assets from Soviet psychological or psychopharmaceutical manipulation. The research included clandestine acquisition of drugs, clinical testing on and experimentation with humans, some of whom were unaware of said testing, and grant proposals and contracts with hospitals, companies, and individuals. The scientists investigated topics ranging from concocting truth serums to developing a humane way to incapacitate guard dogs using a powerful tranquilizer mixed into ground beef. Footnote 11. Several projects involved research on little-understood mind-altering drugs such as LSD and marijuana. In the end, the research produced an assortment of potential offensive capabilities involving incapacitating, lethal, and untraceable toxins. However, the absence of scientific data in the early 1950s about the effective and safe dosage levels of the new drugs, including LSD, presented a problem for the MKUltra researchers. As a result, Gottlieb and members of his team performed experiments on themselves that included ingesting drugs and observing and recording their own reactions. In late 1953, an early LSD experiment involving several government scientists went horribly bad. Hush puppy pills contained a harmless tranquilizer, which was mixed with ground beef and fed to the dog. To avoid suspicion, adrenaline-filled syrettes would reawaken the dog when the mission was concluded. Illustration by Phil Franke. Dr. Frank Olson was working at the U.S. Army Special Operations Division, or SOD, Biological Weapons Facility at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and assisting the CIA on MKUltra projects. Along with half a dozen other scientists, he volunteered to attend a retreat during mid-November 1953 at the remote Deep Creek Lodge in western Maryland, organized by Gottlieb. Footnote 12. Together with 7 other researchers from TSS in Fort Detrick, Olson was served Cointreau liquor that had secretly been spiked with 70 micrograms of LSD. After 30 minutes, the participants were told of the LSD and alerted to begin studying their reactions. Most reported little effect, but Olson had a bad trip that night. As his condition worsened in the following days, Gottlieb's deputy, Dr. Robert Lashbrook, escorted him to New York City for psychiatric counseling. This attention and treatment seemed to calm Olson temporarily, but later that evening, on November 24, 1953, he jumped to his death from a 10th floor window of his New York hotel room. CIA executives seeking to protect the secrecy of the MKUltra program did not fully reveal the circumstances of Olson's death to his family. No other fatalities from the MKUltra experiments occurred, but 2 decades passed before Olson's widow received a delayed apology from President Gerald Ford and a financial settlement from the U.S. government. Footnote 13. Soviet intelligence in the 1950s, however, was less averse to death, either from accident or from assassination. Nikita Khrushchev, the successor to dictator Joseph Stalin, continued the existing policy of special actions as a central tool for dealing with the leaders of anti-Soviet émigré groups. The first target of the post-Stalinist era, Ukrainian nationalist Georgy Okolovich, was spared when the assassination KGB officer Nikolai Koklov confessed the plot to his victim and defected to the CIA. On April 20, 1954, Koklov gave a dramatic press conference and revealed both the assassination plot and his exotic weapon to the world. Footnote 15. The execution device was an electrically operated gun and silencer hidden inside a cigarette pack that shot cyanide-tipped bullets. Footnote 16. This failure was followed soon thereafter by the successful assassination of Ukrainian leaders Lev Hrebet in 1957 and Stephen Bandera in 1959. Both were killed by KGB assassin Bogdan Stashinsky, who defected in 1961 and revealed that he had disposed of his weapon, a cyanide gas gun concealed in a rolled-up newspaper, in a canal near Bandera's residence in Munich, Germany. Footnote 17. An analysis of the KGB cigarette pack gun and Stashinsky's cyanide weapon recovered from the canal stimulated accelerated U.S. efforts to create comparable weaponry for the United States. Footnote 18. The non-discernible binoculator. Illustration by Phil Frank. From the beginning of MKUltra, CIA scientists researched lethal chemical and biological substances as well as truth serums and hallucinogens as they continued work begun in the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. Under a joint project codenamed MK Naomi, TSS and the SOD cooperated on development of ingenious weapons and exotic poisons. One Army-produced handgun, called the non-discernible binoculator, resembled a .45 caliber Colt pistol that, fitted with a telescopic sight and detachable shoulder stock, fired a toxin-tipped dart silently and accurately up to 250 feet. The dart was so small, slightly wider than a human hair, that it was nearly undetectable and left no traces in the target's body during an autopsy. Other dart-firing launchers were developed and concealed inside fountain pens footnote 19. Other dart-firing launchers were developed and concealed inside fountain pens, walking canes, and umbrellas. Footnote 20. A toothpaste tube used as concealment for the CIA's Stinger, a small .22 caliber single-shot firing device. Illustration by Phil Frank. Research was also conducted on a variety of exotic poisons, including shellfish toxins, cobra venom, botulinum, and crocodile bile. Footnote 21. Under the MKUltra program, the CIA stockpiled 8 different lethal substances and another 27 temporary incapacities either for specific operations or as on-the-shelf capabilities for possible future use. Footnote 22. In one example, a tube of poison-laced toothpaste was prepared for insertion into the toiletry kit of President Patrice Lumumba in 1960. However, the CIA office chief in Leopoldville, Larry Devlin, rejected the plan and tossed the tube into the nearby river. Footnote 23. About the same time, CIA treated a handkerchief with an incapacitating agent, brucellosis, to be sent to a targeted Iraqi colonel, footnote 24, but the man was shot by a firing squad before the handkerchief even arrived, footnote 25. Illustrations of the original vials of lethal shellfish toxin created for MKUltra by Phil Frank. Perhaps some of the most creative and almost whimsical CIA plots considered in the early 1960s were part of Operation Mongoose, meant to discredit or assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro using an assortment of incapacitating and deadly paraphernalia. Footnote 26. The CIA considered modifying various devices for assassinating Castro. Illustration by Phil Frank. Hallucinogenic sprays and cigars. One bioorganic chemist proposed spraying LSD inside Castro's broadcasting studio in Havana to cause him to hallucinate. Footnote 27. Since Castro famously smoked cigars, another idea suggested impregnating Castro's cigars with a special chemical to produce temporary disorientation during his rambling speeches during their live broadcasts to the Cuban people. Footnote 28. Contaminated boots. When Castro traveled abroad, he often left his boots outside the hotel room door at night to be shined. CIA considered dusting the insides of the boots with thallium salts, a strong depilatory, which would cause his beard to fall out. The chemical was procured and tested successfully on animals, but the plan scrapped when Castro canceled the targeted trip. Footnote 29. Depilatory poisoned and exploding cigars. Similar to the dusted boot concept, Castro's cigars could be treated with a powerful depilatory causing loss of beard and corresponding damage to his macho image. A special box of cigars was to be provided for Castro during an appearance on David Susskind's television talk show. However, after a senior CIA officer questioned how the operation could ensure that only Castro would smoke the cigars, the idea was abandoned. Footnote 30. In another attempt, a Cuban double agent was recruited to offer Castro a cigar treated with botulin, a deadly toxin that would cause death within seconds. The cigars were passed out to the agent in February 1961, but he failed to carry out the plan. Footnote 31. Cuban security officials eventually created a private cigar brand, the Cohiba, exclusively for Castro to safeguard his supply against future assassination attempts. A third concept involved planning a box of exploding cigars at a place where Castro would visit during a trip to the United Nations and blow his head off. The plan was not carried out. Footnote 32. In addition to cigars, Castro enjoyed Cuba's oceans and beaches, which offered an operational venue for exploding seashells. TSD was asked in 1963 to construct a seashell filled with explosives. This device was to be planted near Cuba's Veradero Beach, a place where Castro commonly went skin diving. CIA discarded the idea as impractical when it failed in operational review. Footnote 33. Contaminated diving suit. A proposal was made for an intermediary to present Castro with a diving suit and breathing apparatus contaminated with tubercle bacillus, tuberculosis germ. Footnote 34. CIA obtained a diving suit and dusted it to produce Madura foot, a chronic skin disease. The plan failed when the intermediary chose to present a different diving suit. Footnote 35. Poisoned pen. About the same time that President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, November 22, 1963, a CIA officer met secretly with Rolando Cubello, a Cuban agent in Paris, and offered a poisoned pen to kill Castro. The device, a paper-made ballpoint, was modified to conceal a small hypodermic syringe for injecting blackleaf 40 poison. Even the slightest prick would result in certain death, though the agent would have time to escape before the effects were noticed. After learning of Kennedy's death, however, Cubello reconsidered the plan and disposed of the pen prior to returning to Cuba. Footnote 36. A decade later, in 1976, American policy governing lethal actions against foreign leaders was formalized when President Ford issued Executive Order 11905, prohibiting political assassinations. Footnote 37. A hypodermic syringe was concealed inside this modified paper-made pen for an operation to assassinate Castro. Illustration by Phil Frank. From the earliest days of MKUltra, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb recognized that CIA's drugs and chemicals, regardless of their ultimate purpose, would be operationally useless unless field officers and agents could covertly administer them. During the same month MKUltra was authorized, April 1953, Gottlieb contacted John Mulholland, then 55 years old and one of America's most respected magicians. Mulholland was an expert in sleight of hand or close-up magics, a style of conjuring that appealed to Gottlieb because it was performed only a few feet from the audience. Footnote 38. Further, sleight of hand illusions required no elaborate props for support. If Mulholland could deceive a suspecting audience who was studying his every move in close proximity, it should be possible to use similar tricks for secretly administering a pill or poison to an unsuspecting target. To do so, CIA field officers would need to be taught to perform their own tricks, and John Mulholland, the author of several books about performing magic, appeared to be the ideal instructor. Footnote 39. When approached, Mulholland soon agreed to develop a spy manual for Gottlieb, describing the various aspects of the magician's art, which might be useful in covert operations. The instructions would provide information enabling a field case officer to develop the skills to surreptitiously place a pill or other substance in drink or food to be consumed by a target. Footnote 40. Mulholland accepted $3,000 to write the manual, and the CIA approved the expense as MKUltra Subproject Number 4 on May 4, 1953. Footnote 41. John Mulholland, world-renowned magician. Deception that is art. Illustration by Phil Frank. As part of the broader top-secret MKUltra program, confidentiality regarding the CIA-Mulholland relationship and possible operational use of the techniques of magic was essential. Multiple layers of security included a formal secrecy agreement with Mulholland, sterile correspondences using alias names, cover companies, and non-attributable post office boxes. CIA used various covers for Dr. Gottlieb. Initially, he communicated with Mulholland as Sherman C. Grifford of Chemrophil Associates through a numbered post office box in Washington, D.C. Footnote 42. Subsequently, the P.O. Box number changed, as did the cover name, to Samuel A. Granger, president of the notional Granger Research Company. Footnote 43. As an added measure, Mulholland's writing contained no reference to the CIA or clandestine operations. Field case officers were called performers or tricksters, and the covert acts referred to as tricks. Mulholland pledged never to divulge, publish, or reveal their information, methods, or persons involved. Footnote 44. Information compartmentation practices at the time made it unlikely that Mulholland was told about any of the other MKUltra sub-projects, and there is no evidence that Mulholland designed the sleight-of-hand tricks for any specific operation. By the winter of 1954, the manuscript titled Some Operational Applications of the Art of Deception was complete. Footnote 45. Gottlieb, apparently pleased with the effort, then saw another area for the magician's skills. The CIA needed new methods for secret communication between officers and spies. Gottlieb invited Mulholland to suggest how the CIA might appropriate techniques and principles employed by magicians, mind readers, etc. to communicate information and the development of new, non-electrical communication techniques. Footnote 46. For this new assignment, Mulholland produced another but much shorter manual titled Recognition Signals. John Mulholland's stationery from 1953 to 1958, courtesy of the authors. In 1956, Gottlieb again expanded John Mulholland's role as a consultant to consider the applications of the magician's techniques to clandestine operations, such techniques to include surreptitious delivery of materials, deceptive movements and actions to cover normally prohibited activities, influencing choices and perceptions of other persons, various forms of disguise, covert signaling systems, etc. Footnote 47. Mulholland's work for TSS continued until 1958, when his failing health from constant smoking and advancing arthritis limited his ability to travel and consult. Footnote 48. The last one was footnote 47. Mulholland's manuscripts, Some Operational Applications on the Art of Deception, and Recognition Signals, are among the few remaining documents to reveal MKUltra's research. Virtually all of the program's reports and operational files on the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior were ordered destroyed by DCI Richard Helms in 1973, 10 years after most of the research had ended. Footnote 49. According to a CIA officer in the 1970s, the Mulholland Manual, or manuals, is the only product of MKUltra known to have escaped destruction. Footnote 50. Gottlieb, MKUltra's principal officer, had written in 1964, "It has become increasingly obvious that over the last several years that the general area of biological and chemical control of human behavior had less and less relevance to current complex operations. On the scientific side, these materials and techniques are too unpredictable in their effect on individual human beings to be operationally useful." Footnote 51. But the destruction of the MKUltra documents would itself become a problem for the agency. In the wake of New York Times articles alleging CIA abuses and misconduct related to domestic spying in December 1974, a U.S. Senate committee headed by Senator Frank Church launched an investigation. One sensational revelation from the hearings involved the discovery of non-operational MKUltra financial and administrative documents that had escaped destruction 2 years earlier. Senate scrutiny of the files revealed that drug experiments with provocative names such as Operation Midnight Climax had been run from CIA safe houses in California and New York. These experiments observed the effects of LSD on unwitting individuals or clients who were lured to the safe houses by prostitutes. Their reactions to drugs were surreptitiously monitored from behind one-way mirrors to judge the effectiveness of LSD, truth serums, and other mind control substances. Footnote 52. Although he had retired for 2 years, Gottlieb was called as a witness by the Senate committee and questioned for 4 consecutive days in October 1975. The questioning concentrated on the drug experiments, and Gottlieb apparently was not asking about the John Mulholland contract. Subsequently, following months of investigative work and thousands of hours of testimony, the Church Committee cited the CIA for a failure of command and control for only 2 drug experimentation projects, including the 1953 event that had resulted in the death of Dr. Olson. The committee then concluded that none of the officers conducting MKUltra had undertaken or participated in illegal or criminal activities. An Operation Midnight Climax researcher monitors the hotel room from behind a one-way mirror to secretly photograph and record events. Illustration by Phil Frank. Keeping his promise of secrecy, Mulholland died in 1970 without revealing his clandestine role as the CIA's magician. Footnote 53. The public learned of his covert relationship with the CIA and the agency's interest in drawing on the techniques of conjuring and magic for its espionage mission only when the MKUltra documents were declassified in 1977. Footnote 54. For nearly 25 years, the story was nearly forgotten until a well-researched article by magic historian Michael Edwards appeared in C.I.A. magazine in 2001, a follow-up August 2003 piece by Richard Kaufman in C.I.A., and a biography of Mulholland by magician Ben Robertson was published in late 2008 under the title Magia C.I.A.N. John Mulholland's Secret Life. Footnote 55. Declassified CIA documents, the C.I.A. articles, and Robinson's book described an elusive illustrated manual written by Mulholland, detailing how to perform magic tricks for potential use by intelligence officers. The 7-chapter titles of Mulholland's first 100-page manuscript were listed in the MKUltra documents, but Edwards noted, today, 5 decades after it was written, the tricks and approaches set forth in this manual are still classified top secret. Footnote 56. Robinson, commenting about the secrecy surrounding Mulholland's manual, stated, of a 121-page manual comprised of 8 chapters, the government has allowed only 56 pages to be made public. Of the 56 pages seen, roughly 2/3 of the pages are visible. The remaining third has been redacted or blacked out. Footnote 57. An internal history of the technical services staff written by a CIA historian between 2000 and 2001 referred to the top-secret Mulholland manual and indicated that no known copies existed. We now know that under his CIA contracts, Mulholland produced at least 2 illustrated manuals. The first described and illustrated numerous tricks, primarily sleight of hand and close-up deceptions for secretly hiding, transporting, and delivering small quantities of liquids, powders, or pills in the presence of unsuspecting targets. The second, much shorter manual revealed methods used by magicians and their assistants to pass information among one another without any appearance of communication. The manuals were written in the form of general training instructions rather than for supporters for specific operations. Only 1 copy of the original manuals is known to have survived. For Gottlieb and his successors, the technique of deception used by performing magicians when added to the magic of technology presented an intriguing potential to enhance the clandestine delivery of materials and secret communications. Mulholland's principles of magic were consistent with the CIA's doctrine of tradecraft, and in the ensuing decades talented consultants from the world of magic provided the CIA with innovative illusions to mask and obscure clandestine operations. Multiple elements of the magician's craft can be seen throughout the world of espionage, most notably in stage management, sleight of hand, disguise, identity transfer, escapology, and special concealment devices such as coins. Stage management and misdirection. The proper secret for a magician to use is the one indicated as best under the conditions and circumstances of the performance. John Mulholland. John Mulholland instructed officers that their success, as opposed to that of magicians, depended on the fact that they are not known to be, or even suspected of being, tricksters. The deceptive techniques he taught for delivering CIA pills, powders, and potions were to be performed clandestinely yet in full view of audiences that, if aware of the nature of the activity, would immediately confront and arrest the spy. Awareness and management of the potentially hostile environment, where audiences are culturally diverse, uncontrolled, and sometimes unseen, is as critical to a spy's success as his special devices. Similarly, a successful stage magician understands that the execution of a trick may not produce an effective illusion unless the stage and audience are consciously managed. Mulholland, the master of close magic, instructed his C.I.A. tricksters that the more of the performer that can be seen, the less his chance of doing anything without detection. As an example, a performer on the stage would be seen were he to put his hand into his pocket, but that action can be made without being seen while standing close to a person, so the hand is outside of his range of vision. Footnote 58. This style of magic was ideal for the C.I.A. intended actions that needed to be performed in close proximity to the target. Sight lines limiting what the audience is allowed to see are arranged so that the magician's trick may be executed without exposing secret equipment or maneuvers. Footnote 59. The placement of the magician's scenery, props, lighting, and even a distractingly beautiful assistant further protect and safeguard the illusion. Sufficient time is allotted for preparing complex illusions, and an unlimited number of rehearsals may be conducted to tweak and perfect the performance. In contrast to espionage, where a single mistake can be deadly for the spy, slip-ups by a magician during a live show carry little consequences beyond momentary embarrassment. To create an effective illusion, the spy and the magician employ similar craft and stage management techniques. Footnote 60. Plausible reasons are substituted for reality to conceal true purposes, and spectator attention is lulled and diverted. For both spies and magicians to be successful, execution must be carefully planned, exhaustively practiced, and skillfully performed. Magicians plan performances by asking themselves, "What is my stage?" and "Who is my audience?" Mulholland taught that these questions should be supplemented by asking, "What is my goal for the operation, and how can I carry out the operation secretly?" Only after these questions have been sufficiently answered can the likely stage and audience be assessed. For the magician, the perfectly executed illusion is the ultimate goal. For the spy, illusion is only a means to divert attention from a clandestine act. To be successful, the espionage illusion must withstand both the direct observation of onlookers or casuals and the scrutiny of professional counterintelligence officers or hostile surveillance, without exposing either the participation or identification of the agent. Typical clandestine acts of this type involve covert exchange of information, money, and supplies between the spy and intelligence officer. Typical clandestine acts of this type involve covert exchange of information, money, and supplies between the spy and the intelligence officer. Proper stage management techniques provide reasons for the magician's audience to believe their eyes instead of their reason. People have an almost infinite capability to self-rationalize and know that humans cannot levitate or survive being cut in half, yet both appear to occur on a well-managed stage. The CIA learned to exploit such tendencies in operations where the spy needed the hostile surveillance team to ignore direct visual observations and rationalize events as non-alerting. For example, an intelligence officer may always park his car at the curb directly in front of his house. This is observed by surveillance. On the day a dead drop is left for an agent, the car is parked across the street from the house. Footnote 61. The agent recognizes the different parking location as a signal, while surveillance sees no significance. Strategic misdirection becomes even more effective when combined with camouflage and illusion. During World War II, stage magician Jasper Maskelyne used his skills for deceiving the eye to support the British Camouflage Directorate. Footnote 62. Inflatable rubber tanks were created to misdirect enemy attention from real tanks that were disguised with plywood shells to appear as transport trucks. Operationally, an entire column of trucks could shed their artificial skins and reappear on the battlefield out of thin air, as if by magic. Such operations also had applications in naval deceptions. In 1915, Q-boats, apparently harmless worn-out steamers appearing to be easy prey, lured German submarines close in to finish them off with their deck gun. The Q-boats had been fitted with concealed guns disguised in collapsible deck houses or lifeboats. Naval uniforms for the crew were exchanged for old second-hand uniforms to disguise the crew and captain, who remained hidden to portray a lightly manned and vulnerable vessel. Only when the submarine drew close enough for the kill would the trap be sprung and the superstructure pivoted away to reveal the Q-boat's formidable weaponry. Footnote 63. Reminiscent of the Q-boat's successful deception, in 1961, CIA officers acquired standard Chinese junks in Hong Kong for conversion with high-speed craft equipped with marine diesel engines, 50 caliber machine guns, and a battery of camouflaged 3.5-inch rockets. The boats, which appeared externally unmodified, would patrol covertly off the Vietnamese coast above the DMZ, and if necessary be able to quickly discard their camouflaged junk superstructure and hull, like magic, before disappearing at high speed. Footnote 64. For agent operations, a retired CIA technical officer, Tony Mendez, has described the elaborate stage management techniques used in Moscow against elite surveillance teams at the KGB's 7th Directorate. By lulling the surveillance teams with an unvarying pattern of daily commute in and around Moscow, the alertness of the watchers would eventually and naturally degrade. Then, after months of an unchanging travel pattern, the CIA officer would disappear during his normal commute for the brief time necessary for a clandestine act, usually filling a dead drop or posting a letter, before reappearing at his destination only minutes behind schedule. Footnote 65. The watchers were not alarmed by this short gap in routine schedule. Mendez explains that when using misdirection, a larger action covers a smaller action, as long as the larger action itself does not attract suspicion. Footnote 66. A CIA officer stationed abroad once commented that having a dog was essential as a mask for secret communication with agents. Taking the dog out for long walks at night, the larger action provided numerous opportunities to secretly mark signal sites and service dead drops, the smaller actions. Surveillance teams became used to the pattern of the late-night walks and were lulled into a false belief that no smaller action clandestine activity would occur. Both magicians and spies must effectively manage the stage and sight lines to create an illusion. CIA officer Haviland Smith, the former senior CIA officer in Czechoslovakia during the late 1950s, developed new operational techniques to exploit weaknesses in the sight lines of the surveillance teams working against him in Prague. He discovered that when he was walking in urban areas on routes he used frequently, the trailing surveillance team was always behind him, and when he made a right-hand turn he would be in the gap or clear of surveillance for a few seconds. Rather than acting suspiciously to evade surveillance, he managed the sight lines to operate before their very eyes while in the gap. Smith repeated the technique during his next posting in East Berlin, and again it worked. By properly managing his stage, all of his operational activities could be conducted in these gaps and out of sight. Footnote 67. Smith continued to refine his techniques for working in the gap, to covertly exchange information with spies, and in 1965 consulted with a magician for tips on using misdirection. Footnote 68. Smith initiated each operational sequence employing an orthogonal approach, right angles or right-hand turns, to ensure he would be free from trailing observation. In a personal demonstration set up at Washington's Mayflower Hotel in front of his boss, the head of the East European Division, he added the new twist of misdirection. Smith had another officer, Ron Estes, make a right-hand turn into the hotel carrying a small package in his right hand beneath his raincoat. Smith, posing as the agent, was waiting inside the door, standing next to a bank of payphones. As Estes approached, he shifted his raincoat from his right hand, and shook it briefly before letting it flop into his left hand. In that same instant, he handed the package unnoticed to Smith with his right hand. The movement of the raincoat successfully diverted attention to the left of Estes and away from the package. Smith received it without notice and moved quickly away and down a stairway. The CIA observers were unaware of the technique and inquired impatiently when the activity would take place. It worked. Misdirection had compounded the effectiveness of stage management. Footnote 69. Performing theaters can be artfully arranged for illusions that provide the stage magician with distinct advantages. Stage lighting assures the audience focus is drawn to visible details intended to enhance the illusion, masking those that are unwanted. Props and paraphernalia are arranged in advance. Access to the stage is controlled and restricted to avoid exposing the magician's secrets. The intelligence officer lacks such advantages, as the location or stage of his performance will be dictated by the requirements of the secret operation. As such, little assured control can be exercised over the audience, lighting, and sight lines. Regardless of how well designed and rehearsed clandestine magic may be, uncertainty always accompanies the real performance. For the field officer and agent, unseen as well as unanticipated spectators or hidden surveillance can expose a clandestine operation with disastrous consequences. Thus, special precautions are required. Robert Hansen, a trained FBI counterintelligence officer who volunteered to spy for Soviet and Russian intelligence, selected the footbridges in the parks of Northern Virginia for his stage. At night he hid tightly wrapped and taped plastic trash bags crammed full of secret U.S. documents or retrieved sacks containing money or diamonds. Hansen cleverly controlled the stage by choosing to perform when the parks were mostly unoccupied and at sites in heavily wooded and secluded park locations. He carefully selected each operational site to minimize his visibility to passers-by, while permitting him to detect possible surveillance prior to placing or removing bags from beneath the footbridge. Footnote 70. Under these circumstances, Hansen exploited an advantage over even the magician's controlled stage, since the absence of any audience virtually guaranteed his success. Footnote 71. For the Central Intelligence Agency, few operations were more dangerous or important than the covert or black exfiltration of endangered officers, agents, and defectors from hostile countries or hostage situations. During the Cold War, the CIA and British intelligence MI6 employed stage management techniques, frequently similar to those in the world of magic, for more than 150 secret operations to bring individuals and their extended families out of the cold. Footnote 72. Stage management by the British Intelligence Service saved one of its most important spies from certain death in 1985. KGB Colonel Oleg Gordievsky, the senior KGB intelligence officer and acting resident in London who was working secretly for the British intelligence, was betrayed by CIA turncoat Aldrich Ames and recalled to Moscow under suspicion. KGB investigators had circumstantial evidence from Ames that pointed to Gordievsky, but lacked the proof necessary to arrest the senior KGB officer. Each day he was subjected to lengthy interrogations as the investigators built their case against him, but allowed to return at night to his apartment, which was rigged with hidden listening devices. They hoped that overhearing a private confession to his wife or an attempt to contact the British would provide the final proof of his treason. Footnote 73. However, Gordievsky secretly activated an emergency escape plan provided to him by MI6, and after eluding surveillance while on his daily jog, traveled by train and bus to the Finnish border. Concurrent with Gordievsky's secret travel, a pregnant British diplomat was driven from Moscow to Helsinki for medical attention. As her car and driver neared the Finnish border, they rendezvoused with Gordievsky and concealed him in the trunk of their diplomatic vehicle. At the border, while KGB border guard officers were examining papers, The German Shepherd guard dog began to sniff suspiciously at the area of the car concealing Gordievsky. Thinking quickly, the pregnant diplomat took a meat sandwich from her bag and offered it to the curious dog as a distraction. Her impromptu stage management, employing misdirection, saved the agent's life, and Gordievsky became the only person known to have escaped Moscow while under the direct observation of the KGB's 7th Directorate. Footnote 74. A classic CIA example demanding exacting stage management for a secret exfiltration is the rescue of 6 U.S. diplomats stranded outside of the American embassy in Iran after the compound was overrun and seized by Iranian students in November of 1979. Mendez, then chief of the disguise section of the CIA's Office of Technical Services, adapted exfiltration techniques to the particular situation. With the assistance of Academy Award winner and Hollywood makeup specialist John Chambers, he created the deception necessary for their rescue. Mendez and his associates formed a notional Hollywood film company, Studio 6 Productions, to produce a science fiction film titled Argo. Studio 6 announced that the film would be shot in Iran and a team would be dispatched to scout potential locations outside Tehran. Fooled by this subterfuge, the Iranian government was expected to agree to cooperate with the Hollywood company as part of efforts to reverse the negative international publicity following the embassy takeover. To prepare the world stage, Mendez opened Studio 6 production offices in the Columbia Studio lot in Hollywood and established credibility by running a full-page business advertisement in the industry's most important trade paper, Variety. Mendez, posing as a European filmmaker, adopted an alias name, obtained visas from the Iranian embassy in Switzerland, and accompanied by a colleague traveled to Tehran in January of 1980. Once contact was established with the 6 diplomats hidden at the residence of a Canadian official, Mendez explained how their cover as filmmakers combined with disguise and fabricated Canadian passports could be used to exfiltrate them out of the Tehran airport. Mendez, a magic enthusiast as well as an accomplished document validator or forger, used a simple sleight of hand trick with wine bottle corks to illustrate how deception and stage management would be used to overcome potential obstacles. His magic and illusion demonstration, called the Impassable Corks, instilled confidence for the plan among the diplomats. Footnote 75. Mendez and his colleagues worked through the weekend to create new Canadian passports and forge the necessary Iranian exit visas. Each of the 6 diplomats received cosmetic makeovers using disguise materials that restyled their looks to appear Hollywood. One conservative diplomat sported snow-white hair with a mod blow-dry. Mendez observed that after the transformation, the diplomat was wearing tight trousers with no pockets and a blue silk shirt unbuttoned down the front with his chest hair cradling a gold chain and medallion. With his topcoat resting across his shoulders like a cape, he strolled around the room with the flair of a Hollywood dandy. Footnote 76. Seats for the escaping diplomats posing as the film's scouting team were booked on a Swissair flight departing from Tehran's Mehrabad airport early on January 28, 1980. Mendez and his CIA colleague arrived at 5:30 a.m. to manage the stage at a time when the departure officials would be sleepy and most of the potentially troublesome Revolutionary Guards were still in bed. The escapees' luggage was emblazoned with Canadian maple leaf stickers, and Mendez hovered above his stage, the airport departure lounge, impressing onlookers with Hollywood talk. The activity effectively supported the newly acquired manners and dress of the disguised diplomats, and by late afternoon all reached Zurich, Switzerland, and freedom. Illusionist Jim Steinmeier, when commenting on the techniques of the escape, noted, Mendez's improvisation was performed with carefully rehearsed scenes, meticulous paperwork, backstopped stories, and exhaustive research. If the 6 Americans seemed to saunter out effortlessly through the Tehran airport, it was because the stage had been beautifully set and the scene masterfully presented. It was a demonstration of Keller the magician's famous boast that once he had an audience under his spell, he could march an elephant across the stage and no one would notice. Footnote 77. Dr. Gottlieb's TSS staff later became the CIA's Office of Technical Services and employed a new generation of magicians and illusionists. Figure courtesy of the authors. Sleight of hand. As beginners, magicians love the colorful boxes they first saw on magic shops' shelves, the trick props that seem to be able to do anything. As sophisticates, they learn that these mechanical props are no substitute for pure ability. Sleight of hand. Jim Steinmeier, Hiding the Elephant. A common and incorrect belief is that the hand is quicker than the eye. Quick movement does not explain an effective illusion by either magicians or spies. In fact, the hand is much slower than the eye, and for deceptive purposes, neither should ever move quickly. An illusion is primarily mental, not visual. When magicians and spies fool the minds of audiences, eyes observe only what the performer intends. Mulholland employed sleight of hand, the skill manipulation of objects in a manner undetectable to the observer, in creating effective deceptions and illusions. He also recognized that such techniques could be learned by intelligence officers and applied in espionage. By replacing quick or clumsy movements that would attract the attention of hostile surveillance teams or an intended target, Mulholland described sleights that would appear to observers as natural and innocent, whether those be gestures, alterations in body posture, or changes in hand position. Effective sleight of hand employs psychology, misdirection, and a natural sequence of steps to create an illusion. Magicians and spies use misdirection so that their audiences will look toward an intended direction and away from the covert act. Since the human mind can only focus on a single thought at a time, controlling the target's visual perception of events unfolding around him can implant a false image in memory. For example, Mulholland instructed officers that the flaming of a match rising in one hand to light a target's cigarette would mask the discreet drop of a pill from the other hand. The target's eyes, focusing as intended on the match, were incapable of also noticing the pill, the covert action. Mulholland realized that CIA officers needed small props to enhance their limited sleight of hand skills. He understood that spectators were less likely to suspect items with which they were already familiar. Commonly seen items such as cigarettes, matchbooks, pencils, and coins appeared almost ubiquitous and inconsequential. Since most onlookers would not suspect that these items could be used as espionage devices, they could be concealments for hiding the pills, potions, and powders such as those produced by MK Ultra. Intelligence officers employed other sleight-of-hand techniques using conjuring paraphernalia. Flash paper, a staple for many magicians, was popular when cigarette smoking was common and acceptable. CIA officers employed it when taking secret notes in hostile and threatening environments. If the officer sensed danger or considered an operation compromised, touching the paper with a lit cigarette would result in its complete and instantaneous destruction. To the surveillance teams, none of the officers' movements appeared unusual, and only the ash residue remained if searched. In later years, as smoking became less acceptable, CIA officers preferred making written notes on water-soluble paper instead of flash paper. Covert communications and tasking instructions were printed on this special water-soluble paper so they could be destroyed quickly and completely in a cup of coffee, splashed with water, or even swallowed. Ryszard Kuklinski, the CIA's most valuable Cold War agent in Poland in the 1970s, kept his secret escape plan on water-soluble paper taped beneath a kitchen cabinet so it could be quickly destroyed in a nearby pan of water. Footnote 78. A principal skill of intelligence officers is taking photographs without being detected. In the 1960s, the CIA needed an effective way to make a Minox subminiature camera disappear quickly after taking a secret photo. The solution employed sleight of hand and a device from the magician's repertoire of disappearing objects. In this case, a holdout, a simple piece of elastic for making a coin disappear from an outstretched hand and up a performer's sleeve, worked well. However, instead of elastic, CIA technicians used a retractable tape measure to fix the mechanism with thin black cord and mounted it on a leather armband. Footnote 79. The cord attached to the end of the Minox, and after the photo was taken, the officer had only to release his grip to allow the camera to retract and disappear up his sleeve. Using sleight of hand can enhance a clandestine operation in other less direct ways. For example, undercover officers often face difficulties infiltrating suspicious groups who are wary when approached by strangers. One solution was a simple trick, the magic beer coaster, to attract attention and have the target come to him. Footnote 80. A folded US $50 bill was inserted into a Heineken beer coaster that had been sliced apart with razor, then re-glued and placed in a book press to flatten it as it dried. The officer appeared several nights at the bar and drank alone while slowly tearing apart a stack of Heineken coasters. When the bartender eventually asked why he was doing this, the officer responded, "Heineken places $50 bills as little-known promotion in unmarked beer coasters." An hour later, the officer employed sleight of hand to introduce a gimmicked coaster into the stack in front of him. When he later tore apart the prepared coaster and discovered the $50 bill, he celebrated loudly and offered to buy a round of drinks. The onlookers came to him. Though the $50 coaster attracted attention, the full effectiveness of the illusion was dependent on the officer's stage performance and his sleight of hand. Disguise and identity transfer. Disguise is only a tool. Before you use any tradecraft tool, you have to set up the operation for the deception. Tony Mendez, former CIA master of disguise. Magicians regularly employ doubles, identical twins, full disguise, or disguise paraphernalia to create effective illusions. CIA disguise technicians employ skills learned in Hollywood to devise a variety of effective disguise solutions. As with stage disguises, the shorter the time the subject will be studied by observers, the less elaborate the disguise must be. A light disguise might include only a wig, glasses, mole, facial hair, dental appliance, and articles of clothing. One application of such disguises occurred during meetings with an unknown volunteer called a walk-in, who sought to meet with someone in American intelligence. Footnote 82. In such cases, the CIA officer would put on a light disguise to provide limited protection against being later identified by terrorists or the local counterintelligence service. However, if the volunteer appeared to have valuable information and the attributes to become a future spy, his identity had to be protected, and a light disguise could effectively mask his appearance as he departed the meeting. In the late 1970s, Hollywood makeup artist John Chambers worked with CIA technicians to create a new generation of face masks using techniques developed for the hit movie Planet of the Apes. Footnote 83. His masks blended articulated facial elements to appear lifelike when individuals talked or blinked their eyes. Illusions created with the new masks could withstand scrutiny for several hours or longer. More elaborate disguises could affect an ethnic or gender change as well. Custom clothing altered body type and weight distribution, and dental appliances altered facial features and speech tone. Hair could be dyed and makeup employed to give a younger or older appearance. CIA field officers in Moscow frequently donned light disguises such as that of a Russian worker for meetings with agents, circa 1982. Illustration courtesy of the authors. The FBI has used disguise techniques for years when pursuing evidence in counterintelligence investigations against U.S. traitors who spied for the Soviet Union and thought they had successfully retired. A disguised undercover officer, a special agent who spoke with a heavy Eastern European accent, dressed in a poorly fitting suit tailored in the former Soviet bloc, sought to re-establish contact with former agents. Footnote 84. Though the retired spies were initially wary, the special agent's stage management, attire, and disarming questions such as "Do we still owe you money?" eventually elicited replies and provided evidence. One notable catch from this operation was retired U.S. Army Colonel George Trofimov, who had been an important KGB spy for 25 years until his retirement in 1994. When recontacted by the undercover officer in 1997, he provided compromising details over the next 2 years before sufficient evidence was gathered for his arrest. His motivation in talking was to recover payments for information provided during his career as a spy, but for which he alleged no payment had been received. In 2001, Trofimov, then aged 75, was convicted and received a life sentence. Footnote 85. Disguises can also be used with greater speed and creativity than sometimes imagined. When in less than a second a magician's assistant is transported from one side of the stage to the other, there can be no other apparent explanation for the audience except its magic. Illusionists perform similar feats nightly, and Houdini's mysterious disappearance through a newly constructed brick wall act was one of his most famous illusions. R.D. Adams, the craftsman who constructed Houdini's magical apparatus, described the illusion. A dozen or more bricklayers in overalls appeared before the audience and built a bona fide brick wall 7 or 8 feet high, extending from the footlights to almost the rear of the stage. When it was completed, Houdini was ready to disappear. After a few appropriate remarks, he stepped behind a small screen, something like a prompter's box, which the bricklayers pushed slowly to the center of the wall. The bricklayers moved over to the other side and adjusted a similar screen there opposite the first one. Here I am, Houdini would shout, and waving his arms thrust through holes in the screen gave evidence of the fact. Then the arms would disappear and Houdini would step forth from the screen on the other side of the wall. At the time, respected skeptics speculated that Houdini did this by using a trap door, which allowed secret passage from one side of the stage to the other. Such speculation was inaccurate, however, since the investigating committee that validated the integrity of each performance would have detected the trap door. To confound the audience in later performances, Houdini even placed a sheet of paper or a sheet of glass beneath the wall to demonstrate that a trap door was not used. The secret, Adams explained, was Houdini disappeared through the wall only in the minds of the exceedingly gullible. As a matter of fact, while the first screen behind which he had stepped was being pushed back against the wall, he leaped into a pair of blue jumpers and pulled a workman's cap down far over his face. When the screen touched the wall, he was one of the bricklayers as far as the audience was concerned. He got behind the second screen disguised as a bricklayer. From this point he did his calling to the audience. Mechanical arms and hands operated by a hidden rope leading to the wings furnished the gestures which convinces Houdini was behind screen number 1 instead of number 2, completing the illusion. Footnote 87. One of Houdini's most mystifying tricks. A. The brick wall was built on a glass plate. B. Mechanical hands were moved by ropes. C. Houdini, who was disguised as a bricklayer, changed sides and removed his overalls behind a screen before reappearing. Illustration by Phil Frank. Such a baffling and effective illusion can also be accomplished employing an identical or disguised twin. Footnote 88. One assistant seemed to vanish, and almost instantly reappears in another location, sometimes for effect even suspended above stage. To deceive the audience, the lovely blonde assistant and her replacement must be of similar body type, dressed in similar attire, using the same makeup and hair or wigs. To the audience who never sees them together to form a comparison, they appear identical. The less time the audience has to scrutinize elements of the deception, such as details of the assistant's appearance, the more effective the illusion. The magician never announces the deception in advance, and the audience has no opportunity or reason to scrutinize any of the onstage participants. At the C.I.A., the identical twin illusion became known as identity transfer. An officer would disappear from one location and reappear somewhere else as the same or a different person. When this was properly staged, surveillance teams were never aware of the switch, and officers were able to evade hostile surveillance prior to performing operational acts. Successful C.I.A. identity transfers involved an entire Little Theater presentation, which was performed for several hours before the swap took place. The actual transfer required only a few minutes at the most and was nearly impossible for even a trained observer to detect. The staged scenario presented to surveillance was geared toward fooling their minds rather than just fooling their eyes. Disguise was critical, but only one element of the magic demanded by an identity transfer illusion, whether performed in an auditorium or on the street. Moscow represented one of the CIA's most dangerous operational areas during the Cold War due to the effectiveness of the KGB's 7th Directorate surveillance apparatus. CIA officers serving in Moscow were never publicly identified. They worked during the day in a variety of cover jobs and then at night and on weekends as intelligence officers. Though they were protected from prosecution by diplomatic immunity, their greater concern was that hostile surveillance of their clandestine activities might expose their agents who were subject to arrest and execution. Therefore, it was imperative that an officer go black, become free of surveillance, before conducting an operational act, and keep his agents safe. Different ruses utilizing techniques similar to those developed by Houdini decades earlier proved successful. In one of the first successful identity transfer performances in Moscow, an American intelligence officer planning a clandestine meeting with a top spy had to assure himself he would be free of surveillance. The officer carefully choreographed a performance with a similarly sized fellow worker during an official social function they would both attend. On the appointed evening, the officer, accompanied by his wife, arrived at the reception dressed in his normal suit and tie. His partner in the operation, who was not under suspicion, arrived separately in garish 1970s mod-style clothing. Both knew that their arrival and appearance would be noted by KGB surveillance posted around the official compound. Then a third official, driven by his spouse, arrived at the function on crutches, wearing a leg-cast ski jacket and cap, following an unfortunate skiing accident the previous weekend. Once all were inside, the intelligence officer swapped clothing and identity with the garishly dressed man, and left the reception in the company of the injured official whose wife was driving the car. The exit of the mod-dressed man, accompanied by his friend on crutches, would be observed by KGB surveillance, who assumed the intelligence officer was still inside. Once away from the compound, the officer changed into nondescript clothing hidden in the vehicle and met safely with his agent. Before returning, he again changed into the garish outfit, and in the company of the injured skier, re-entered the compound they had earlier left. There a clothing and identity switch was made with the original partner. The normally dressed suit and tie officer rejoined the function, apologizing for being away for a few minutes to answer questions from another self-important bureaucrat in Washington. The successful performance using identity transfer techniques that fooled the KGB would have made Houdini proud. Footnote 89. Another identity transfer technique permitted an intelligence officer to exit a car while being driven through the darkened streets of Moscow, yet appearing to the trailing surveillance vehicles as if he were still inside. To set the stage, the intelligence officer and driver moved at normal speed through the nighttime streets, knowing the KGB surveillance teams were following their cars from behind a discreet distance. Experience had taught them that when slowing for a right-hand turn on the dark streets, the car was out of sight of the trailing KGB vehicle for a few seconds. In this brief moment in obscura, which they called the gap, the intelligence officers, riding in the passenger seat, could roll unseen out of the slowed car. The challenge was to disguise his absence, so when the headlights of the trailing surveillance vehicle turned the corner, two silhouetted figures would still be seen in the car ahead. The answer was the CIA's creation of a three-dimensional human torso sitting atop a spring-activated scissor lift mechanism fitted with a rotating head, which collapsed into a small portable briefcase or duffel bag. This piece of equipment acquired the name Jack-in-the-Box, or JIB. With one hand, the driver could unlatch the carrying case and lift the JIB instantly into place. The JIB had a trigger grip to rotate the head and a collapsing scissor mechanism for storage. Illustration by Phil Frank. Instead of using offstage ropes to manipulate artificial hands and legs, as in Houdini's disappearance through a brick wall, the CIA used a trigger grip to rotate the JIB's artificial head and create an effective illusion for the KGB surveillance vehicles. When the officer was ready to re-enter the car, the JIB would be pushed back into its resting position and the briefcase shoved to the floor. Figure 90. Footnote 90. The CIA understood that by controlling the location of the event, an empty street in Moscow, the lighting, an unlit area, the audience, the trailing surveillance car, the timing when the cars were a sufficient distance apart, and the sight line visible only from the rear, they could stage manage an effective illusion. One of the CIA's most unusual plans for an identity transfer required a big dog. In the 1970s, a plan was conceived to post an officer abroad with an adult male Saint Bernard weighing more than 180 pounds. When identity transfer was needed, the dog would be swapped for an agent concealed in a full Saint Bernard skin and inside a portable kennel. A tape recorder and small speakers hidden in the kennel provided sound effects to enhance the effectiveness of the illusion. The agent dog would be taken to a safe location for examination by a veterinarian. Once inside the safe house, the agent could be safely debriefed, and when the examination was complete, he could redon the dog's skin, get into the kennel, and be returned home. Footnote 91. The idea of swapping identities with an animal was not completely new and had been previously developed during World War II. The British Special Operations Executive, SOE, created an innovative camouflage for parachutists secretly landing in German-occupied France. A two-piece collapsible rubber cow was painted in advance of the operation to blend with livestock in the landing area. The plan then called for agents to parachute the rubber cow with them, land, and bury their parachutes. That done, they would climb into their respective half of the two-person cow, join up, and remain concealed until members of the local French resistance units arrived and led them to safety. Tests showed the camouflage to be effective at night, and though rubber cows were produced, no record exists of their being used operationally. Footnote 92. Escapology. Anything that can be locked by one man can be unlocked by another. Escape artist Steranko. Danger is sometimes an unfortunate consequence of espionage, and even the most skilled intelligence officers and spies may be caught and incarcerated. The art and practice of escaping from constrictions, be they ropes, handcuffs, straitjackets, jails, or even a country, is escapology. Magicians and performers have long employed such techniques to entertain audiences expecting to see an impossible escape. Spies have been equipped with similar tools and techniques for situations in which imprisonment could lead to death and escape is not expected. Creative minds have continually devised special equipment and techniques to escape from virtually every type of restraint. Secret escape techniques developed by magicians over the last 150 years to amaze audiences have also been used by spies. Escaping locks and chains requires special technical knowledge, a hidden key or tool, or a willing confederate. In the early 1900s, Harry Houdini employed all of these to become one of the most famous celebrities of his day. His creativity and innovation were exhibited during a 1903 visit to Moscow, where he issued a challenge to the Russian secret police, proclaiming his ability to escape from their dreaded Siberian transport cell, or carrette, a large horse-drawn safe on wheels used for conveying prisoners to Siberia. Footnote 93. The challenge was accepted, and Houdini, stripped naked in freezing weather and searched thoroughly by 3 police officers, was manacled, shackled, chained to foot fetters, and locked inside the vault-shaped wagon. The lock controlling the door was inaccessible from the inside, and a small slit on the outside of the carrette, allowing access, required a different key to open it from the one to lock it. Footnote 94. Nevertheless, minutes later, Houdini emerged to the amazement and fury of his wary hosts. How he had escaped was soon obvious to his jailers, but they remained puzzled about the trick he used to sneak his tools into his prison. Houdini's preparations began the day before the escape, when his assistant Franz Kukol managed to glimpse the underside of the carriage. Kukol observed that the carriage's plain wooden floor was protected only by a thin layer of zinc. Kukol recognized that just 2 tools were needed for the escape: a flexible metal wire used by surgeons for cutting bone called a gigli saw, and a tiny cutting tool. Footnote 95. Houdini's plan was to completely avoid the heavy doors and locks, and cut through the floor to escape the carriage. Footnote 96. Houdini had managed to conceal his escape apparatus during the probing searches of his jailers in a small sixth finger, footnote 97. As the guards searched first his upper body, then his lower body, he switched the hollow finger between his trousers and hand. Once locked inside the carrette, Houdini effected his escape in only a minute by cutting a slit in the zinc layer and sawing through the floorboards, footnote 98. He credited his escape abilities to the technical skills, physical ability, and trickery in concealing the equipment necessary for the act. A few years earlier, in 1900, Houdini's escaping skills had attracted the attention of William Melville, the head of Britain's Scotland Yard Special Branch, footnote 99. Dismissive of what he presumed were theatrical stage handcuffs, the chief encircled Houdini's arms around a pillar and snapped on regulation Scotland Yard handcuffs. Melville was amazed at Houdini's self-extrication within seconds and pronounced, "Scotland Yard won't forget you, young man." Footnote 100. Melville fulfilled his own prediction. When British agents began training in 1914 to operate against Germany during the build-up to World War I, those attending an MI5 spy school received lectures taught by Melville on how to pick locks and burgle houses. Other presentations included the technique of lying, the technique of being innocent, the will to kill, sex as a weapon in intelligence, and finally Dr. McWhirter's butchery class, which taught one how to top or kill yourself if you were caught. Footnote 101. The impact of Houdini's magical escape techniques influenced later generations of clandestine officers. Clayton Hutton, a pilot in the Royal Flying Corps during the First World War, volunteered his services to British military intelligence in the late 1930s, footnote 102. None of Hutton's skills seemed of value until he mentioned his great interest in magicians, illusionists, and escapologists. He described responding to a 100-pound challenge from Houdini in 1913 for anyone who could construct a wooden box from which the magician could not escape. Hutton accepted the challenge, and Houdini was handcuffed, put in a sack, and locked in Hutton's formidable wooden packing case. To Hutton's dismay, Houdini escaped within minutes. Hutton said he learned years later that his own assistant, Ted Withers, a first-class carpenter, had been bribed by Houdini for £3 before the performance. Withers gimmicked the case with false nails at the end to enable an easy escape. Footnote 103. Houdini cut the sack using a small razor blade he had palmed while shaking hands with the last man to come up on stage, a Confederate. Footnote 104. After hearing the story, the British intelligence officer conducting his interview, Major J.H. Russell, commented, "You may be the man we want. We're looking for a showman with an interest in escapology. You appear to fit the bill." Footnote 105. Hutton got the job. MI9, a division of British military intelligence, was responsible for helping service personnel evade capture when possible, escape where necessary, collect intelligence, and distribute information. Footnote 106. Their efforts were centered at the Secretive Intelligence School 9, IS-9, where Hutton worked to invent, design, and adapt aids for evasion, escape, and secret communication with prisoners of war. Evading capture required small, easily carried and hidden equipment for terrain and directional knowledge, such as maps and compasses. Hutton remembered the methods Houdini had used 30 years earlier to conceal his escape aids and adapted them to hide MI9's gadgets from determined searches by German police and guards. Escape maps were concealed within false backs of playing cards or printed on silk or rice paper to be folded silently into tiny volumes. Miniature telescopes were hidden inside a cigarette holder, and smoking pipes, belt buckles, and even magnetized razor blades were used to hide compasses. The face of a standard brass uniform button unscrewed to reveal a hidden compass and was one of Hutton's most effective deceptions. In his first hidden compass design, the button was unscrewed with a standard left-hand thread. When German guards got wise to the concealment, Hutton quickly changed the design to utilize a right-hand thread on the buttons. The deception worked as planned, and the more the German guards tried to open the new buttons conventionally with a counterclockwise rotation, the tighter they became. Footnote 107. The imagination required for conceiving devices seemed to have no limits. One escape kit fitted with a pocket knife contained wired cutters, saw blades, and a lock breaker. Footnote 108. Another kit, concealed in a boot heel that was accessible through a hinged flap in the straight edge of the heel, contained a silk map, a compass, and a small file. The brother of magic dealer Will Gladstone had first created the hollow heel for the Mokana shoe in 1901, which Houdini used successfully to evade the invasive police searches that preceded his escapes. Footnote 109. Though stripped naked, he had requested shoes to ward off cold feet. Footnote 110. During World War II, others from the world of magic applied their craft to support the British intelligence services. One-time missionary Charles Fraser Smith created gadgets and tricks for Britain's SOE and MI6 to deceive the Axis. Among these were pocket-sized radio receivers, a device that seemed impossible at a time when home radios were so large that they were considered pieces of furniture. The radios allowed agents, as well as prisoners, to receive one-way communications. One set, designed for smuggling into POW camps, was purposefully manufactured crudely to appear as if it had been cobbled together by the prisoners. Footnote 111. Tools such as the Gigli saw used by Houdini were capable of cutting through a 1-inch steel bar and could be concealed within the shoelace of a British pilot, just in case. Footnote 112. Concealed knife blades for cutting ropes were fitted onto the back of copper coins and passed unnoticed during a search. Other knife blades were concealed in a boot heel reinforcement, so even if the wearer was captured and hogtied, the blade could be reached. Military uniforms were designed for quick change conversion into civilian clothes by use of dye concealed in the ink bladders of standard-looking fountain pens. Footnote 113. Cut down and recolored, the uniforms provided a lower profile for escapees. Even military-issue leather flying boots were designed for instant conversion to civilian walking shoes by making a few cuts with a small concealed blade. The secret escape apparatus developed by Houdini and early 20th century magicians continued to influence spy gadgetry during the Cold War. 114. Footnote 114. Houdini had hidden a small egg-shaped container holding a variety of small lockpicks in the back of his throat while being searched. The concealment was safe from all but a search of by the most determined jailers. Footnote 115. The CIA, using a similar design, created an escape and evasion suppository as a portable toolkit packed within a waterproof black plastic shell. This spy's Leatherman featured 9 escape tools, including wire cutters, pry bars, saw blades, drill, and reamer, packed into the 4-inch long by 1-inch diameter kit. Footnote 116. The CIA Escape and Evasion Rectal Suppository was a multi-purpose toolkit packed within a small waterproof black plastic or aluminum shell, circa 1955. Actual size 4 inches long by 1 inch diameter, courtesy of the authors. Lockpicking, which even for Houdini was a last resort, had always been a useful skill for spies. Spies were taught the magician's principle to beg, borrow, bribe, or steal the master or original key if possible, before attempting to break into or escape from a locked enclosure. Once obtained, the master key could be covertly impressioned using clay, wax, or even a small bar of soap and returned. From this impression, an exact duplicate key could be cut and concealed. Footnote 117. The OSS and later the CIA issued key impressioning kits using modeling clay in a pocketable aluminum mold for this purpose. Footnote 118. For actual lock-picking, should that be necessary, the CIA improved on the design of a small concealable pocket knife, designed first by the OSS, that contained 6 small tools of the type Houdini employed 70 years earlier in his own concealed escape kits. Footnote 119. Concealments. The CIA concealment specialist combines the skills of a craftsman, the creativity of an artist, and the illusion of a magician. CIA concealment engineer. Traditionally, conjurers must be smartly groomed and remain polished, refined, confident, and poised throughout the performance. Their clothing must be well tailored, yet incorporate special pockets for the concealing performance paraphernalia, including tricked coins, cards, handkerchiefs, flowers, hollow thumbs, and even live animals. Footnote 120. Spies also wear clothing designed specifically for their performances. Footnote 121. If the magician desires to produce a large rabbit, he might employ a rabbit bag under his arm. However, if his dress suit is cut too tightly, the bulge will be visible. Conversely, if the conjurer's attire is noticeably large to accommodate the bulk of the rabbit, suspicions will be raised. Author Daryl Fitzkey observed, "Any variation from the norm attracts undesirable attention from the viewpoint of the magic. The conjurer must remain natural at all times. When something unnatural is evident, a spectator becomes vigilant and alert to deception." Footnote 122. Whether one is a magician or a spy, specially tailored clothing must distribute both the weight and bulk of hidden items, while keeping the items accessible for the performance of secret operation. Footnote 123. CIA officer Richard Jacob was wearing a specially tailored raincoat when detained in Moscow in 1962, just after receiving Minox film concealed in a matchbox, which had been hidden behind a radiator in a public hallway and placed there by CIA's top Soviet spy, GRU Colonel Oleg Penkovsky. Jacob's modified raincoat included a slit inside a pocket. When Jacob saw he was about to be detained, he dropped the matchbox through the slit to the inside of the coat, letting it fall to the floor. Thanks to the accessibility of the flap within his special clothing, he was not apprehended with the stolen secrets in hand or coat pocket. Footnote 124. Other forms of attire, such as shoes, can be ideal concealment cavities for use by both conjurers and spies. The hollow Mokana shoe, used by Houdini for hiding escape tools, became a favorite for spies throughout the Cold War. Footnote 125. Concealment heels were used by East German agents to transport Minox film cassettes in both men's and women's shoes. In the 1960s, Czechoslovakian intelligence (STB) technicians placed an entire eavesdropping transmitter into the heel of an unsuspecting U.S. ambassador's shoe. Footnote 126. When it was activated, the ambassador became a walking broadcasting station who was bugging his own secret meetings. Footnote 127. Power's silver dollar with cutaway view revealing inner pin. Illustration by Phil Franke. For a CIA application, the U.S. Army Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, Maryland, worked in the late 1950s with the technical services staff to create a concealment coin for U-2 pilots overflying the USSR. Footnote 128. The coin was a silver dollar mounted inside a bezel with a loop on the end for holding a chain that could be worn around the neck. Inside the hollow shaft of a straight pin, a poison needle was concealed. Footnote 129. The pin fit into a small hole drilled into the edge of the coin and held in place by the silver bezel. When a small hole in the bezel was aligned with the hole in the coin, the straight pin was ejected by an internal spring. With a tiny prick of the skin by the needle, death would be nearly instantaneous. Footnote 130. On May 1, 1960, CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers was issued the modified coin as he prepared to depart from Peshawar, Pakistan, and overfly the Soviet Union. Footnote 131. After his U-2 was shot down over Sverdlovsk, USSR, he parachuted safely into a farmer's field, hid the pin in his pocket, and discarded the coin. Both the coin and pin were recovered by the KGB and used as evidence against Powers at his subsequent trial for espionage. Footnote 132. The needle was constructed using a tiny drill bit brazed to the head of a common straight pin. The sheath was built from a hypodermic syringe fitted to a machined metal tip. Illustration by Phil Franke. Concealed devices can be made part of clothing or hidden inside body cavities to support clandestine operations. During the first half of the 20th century, conjurers created the illusion of telepathy or second sight using only voice codes. Footnote 133. As new technologies became available in the 1970s, sub-miniature radios could be hidden inside the performer's clothing and connected by small wires running from his neck to a concealed earpiece. The performer's stylishly long hair hid the wires. Later, the telltale wires disappeared as hearing aid-sized radio receivers could be fitted directly into the ear canal. Footnote 134. The problem then became one of hiding the earpiece rather than the wires. Footnote 135. The solution was a CIA-developed color-matched silicone covering that was camouflaged to replicate the inner ear's contours and shadows. Footnote 136. So effective was the illusion that the KGB missed the device during a search of CIA officer Martha Peterson after her detention at a dead drop in Moscow in 1977. Peterson's surveillance radio, attached to her bra with Velcro and concealed in her armpit, was discovered, but the absence of visible wires caused the KGB to ignore the concealed earpiece. Footnote 137. Other body parts and orifices were used for concealment as well. In the late 1960s, the CIA fielded a military request to provide a means for concealing a sub-miniature escape radio on a downed pilot who was likely to be captured and searched. Advances in miniature circuitry using transistors had produced a radio 1/2 the size of a cigarette pack, but it needed a hiding place. CIA engineers knew that guards were less likely to search another man's genitalia, and created a false rubber scrotum that fit over the wearer's testicles. Matched to skin color and incorporating full anatomical detail, the prosthesis was virtually undetectable, but formed a cavity large enough to conceal the escape radio. Footnote 138. Concealing larger objects presents a different set of problems. Magicians consider any object on the stage, from the performing table to the props themselves, including their bases or platforms, as a partial concealment cavity for the object, animal, or person to be hidden. Concealing the conjurer's load in a hidden cavity is a science that employs lighting, positioning, design, craftsmanship, and viewing angles to deceive the audience. The platform holding the woman about to be sawed in half appears impossibly small to conceal a second woman, and yet by fooling the eye, the mind accepts the illusion as reality. Spies and magicians employ concealment cavities to deceive their audiences. Concealing the second woman in the impossibly small cavity is essential for the success of the deception. Here the magician uses a curtain to mask the size of the platform. Illustration by Phil Frank. The CIA employed such a ruse during a Cold War operation to smuggle a spy concealed within a new Mercedes being driven out of Eastern Europe. The car's original fuel tank was redesigned to allow a person, though contorted, to fit inside it, while to any observer the car looked factory new. Intelligence services had employed other concealments for illusions when faced with the challenge of moving a person unnoticed while under surveillance. Their creative solutions adapted the same principles of deception used by magicians. One was to construct a stack of luggage to be rolled on a hand dolly. The pieces of luggage appeared unmodified, but each contained a hidden opening that allowed a person to sit inside. No single piece of luggage was large enough for the deception, but when they were stacked together, a person could fit inside. Footnote 139. A second technique involved stacking cases of bottled water side by side on a large rolling cart. Each case was wrapped in plastic, and to observers it appeared the light was passing through all of the cases. In actuality, however, the outer cases were only shells with mylar inside the outer rows of plastic bottles to reflect the light outward. Inside the stack of cases was a cavity large enough to hide a person. Each illusion had been constructed using the designs of a new generation of Hollywood illusionists brought to the CIA in the mid-1970s. The same principles of optical illusion that amazed audiences in Las Vegas stage performances paved the way for more daring and successful CIA clandestine operations. Footnote 140. The modified fuel tank is only partially filled with gas and contains a cavity to conceal a person being exfiltrated from a hostile area. From the outside, the car appears normal. Illustration by Phil Frank. The illusion of light appearing to pass through the stacked cases of bottled water masks the person hidden inside. Illusion by Phil Frank. A primary area for CIA concealment technology involved designing unsuspicious hosts for money, film cassettes, and other spy paraphernalia to be exchanged between agents and field case officers at dead drops. Footnote 141. The hosts might appear as innocuous tree branches, discarded soda cans, or even construction bricks left over at a building site. Footnote 142. Each item was left at an agreed-on time and location for recovery a few minutes later. In the Cold War years before digital technology, such timed exchanges were a primary method of clandestine communication, and still being used by Robert Hansen at the time of his arrest in 2001. Cold War operational requirements led the CIA to create a category of dead drop concealments using host carcasses. Virtually any animal carcass could be configured with a cavity for exchanging spy gear. The more repugnant the host carcass, the less likely it would be disturbed until collected. Pigeons and rodents, because they are small enough to be carried in a pocket and are found in almost every part of the world, were especially attractive hosts. Their eviscerated and preserved bodies, cavities, were large enough to hold money instructions, sub-miniature cameras, film, notes, and code books. Footnote 143. The carcasses filled with paraphernalia for the agent could be tossed from a slow-moving vehicle at predetermined locations along the darkened streets of virtually any city. Who would disturb the carcass of a dead rat or rotting pigeon? That question had to be answered when deployed rats unexpectedly went missing. Hungry cats, unaware of the concealed treasure, had carried the rats off before the agents arrived. The solution to the problem was a liberal dousing of hot pepper sauce on the rodent before the operation. When a magician pours water from a pitcher on the stage, the audience sees it as real, yet the hidden compartment concealed by a mirror inside the pitcher, is never observed as water is pouring out. The CIA used the same principle when designing active concealments for agents. Each item retained its original function, but masked a concealed cavity inside. The Cricket cigarette lighter, concealing a tiny document camera, was unlikely to be examined after demonstrating that it produced a flame. Likewise, a working fountain pen was dismissed by the KGB as a possible host for a suicide pill. Footnote 144. Less sophisticated passive concealments can be effective when a device needs to perform no other function than to conceal the cavity. For example, a large wooden storage cabinet in a basement mounted against a wall performs no function except to mask the entrance to a hidden crawl space for secretly entering or exiting the house. A large piece of furniture with a concealed inner panel masked the entrance to an escape tunnel. Illustration by Phil Frank. The concealments and tricks Mulholland envisioned for intelligence officers in his manual combined classic methods of the magician's art with the most non-suspicious host objects available. Smaller packages attracted less attention, and a concealment device had to fit naturally into the act being performed. Few props served this purpose better than the coins found in every pocket and purse. Magic coins. The best magicians come to understand that these gimmicks are mere tools for the presentation. Illusion, not mere gimmicks, must be presented in any real magical performance. Footnote 145. A quote by Jim Steinmeier. Coins provide objects for the tricks of magicians and spies that can easily deceive and confound audiences, as well as espionage targets. The magician employs sleight of hand to make them appear, vanish, or change for amusement. A spy's coin can mask the presence of an attached pill, conceal a hidden powder, or contain a secret message. A trick becomes a piece of sheer incredibility in Mulholland's hands. Fulton Orsler, courtesy of the authors. As mentioned previously, the magician plays to an audience that expects to be deceived, while the spy's trick occurs before an unwitting audience and unsuspecting target. Magicians refer to performances with coins as close-up magic because of the small size of the physical objects being manipulated and the short distance between the performer and the audience. The audience must be close enough to the performer to see the effects, otherwise it will not be deceived or even be aware of the illusion. For the intelligence officer, performing the trick in close proximity to the target minimized exposure to onlookers and limited the target's sight lines as well. Footnote 146. Coins are well suited for close magic, but manipulating them requires dexterity, skill, and grace. Footnote 147. For both magicians and spies, their universal presence offers great advantages. Coins create no suspicion in contrast to other pieces of magical apparatus such as linking rings, wooden boxes, stage cabinets, and top hats, which simply by being on stage arouse curiosity and questions. Footnote 148. Most people do not assume that coins will be modified or used in deception. Such perceptions can be readily exploited to deceive an unwitting target. Mulholland understood that maximum audience deception would occur when real coins were used to create espionage magic. As a result, most of the coins in his manual of deception of the CIA were unmodified. For example, in one trick, a pill was affixed to the back of a real coin with a small dab of gum of Arabic or magician's wax. The coin would appear as just one of several others when held in the trickster's palm. Professional coin manipulators employ a number of gimmicked coins that mirror the techniques used in spy coins. These magic coins are constructed in ways that permit them to seemingly change denominations, multiply, pass through solid objects, and survive penetration. These and other gimmicked coins are designed for quick manipulation in performing an illusion. Footnote 149. They would not, however, survive close examination or, in most instances, satisfy the requirements of a professional intelligence service that primarily uses coins for clandestine communication, transporting and exchanging information. Hollow coins were employed by Soviet agents in the early 1930s to conceal secret information or microdots, soft film, or one-time pads, particularly while traveling or passing information between agent and handler. Footnote 150. In the United States, attention was drawn to the Soviet use of spy coins for the first time in the early 1950s during the famous hollow nickel case. Footnote 151. In 1935, a young Brooklyn newspaper boy dropped a nickel that was discovered to be modified when it was split open to reveal a tiny piece of film hidden inside an interior cavity. On the film was a ciphered message. The nickel was part of a sophisticated covert communication exchange between Soviet spy Rudolf Ivanovich Abel and his assistant Reino Haihanen, who had accidentally lost the spy coin. Footnote 152. Russian spy coin machined to create a cavity for concealing soft film and ciphers. The coin opened by inserting a small tool or needle into the loop of the numerical 9 and the date 1991 on the bottom face of the coin, courtesy of the authors. On June 26, 1953, the nickel was examined by the FBI and appeared unmodified, but had a tiny hole drilled in one side so that a fine needle could be inserted to force the sides apart. The examiner, Special Agent Robert J. Lamphere, examined the coin and correctly concluded that there was a Soviet illegal operating in New York City. However, the FBI was unable to identify the owner of the coin or break the cipher. Footnote 153. The mystery remained unsolved until Haihanen defected in Paris in 1957 and revealed that Rudolf Ivanovich Abel had received ciphered instructions from Moscow using the coin. A subsequent search of Haihanen's apartment uncovered another spy coin of similar construction, a 50 marka coin from Finland. It too had been hollowed out and had a small hole in the first A of the word Tasavalta appearing on the tail side of this coin. Abel was convicted of espionage in 1957 and served 5 years of a 30-year sentence before being exchanged in 1962 for CIA pilot Gary Powers. Footnote 154. The effectiveness of coins as hiding places also made them easy to lose. They were small, could be easily dropped, mistakenly spent, or become mixed in a handful of similar coins. In the early 1950s, another Russian illegal, Valery Mikhailovich Makayev, lost a hollow Swiss coin containing operational instructions on microfilm while returning to his post from leave in Moscow. The KGB recalled him to the Soviet Union and his career was ended. Footnote 155. There is no record of the coin being discovered and it may still be in circulation. Intelligence services of the Soviet Union as well as Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and Hungary used concealment coins throughout the Cold War. The East German Foreign Intelligence Service, the HVA, produced concealment coins with 3 different methods of opening. Each appeared externally unmodified, but required different techniques to access their contents. The pinhole coin required a special tool or needle to force the sides apart. The design is very similar to KGB concealment coins. The screw-top coin had an exterior shell with second and smaller face of the obverse design of the original coin that fit within the milled edges of the shell. The piece matched perfectly, and only the lighter weight of the coin might give it away. Footnote 156. Placing the coin in the palm and using the opposing thumb to unscrew the inner face provided access to the concealment. The bang ring coin, fitted with an obverse facing to appear unaltered, required that the agent also possess a fitted machined ring for opening. Footnote 157. In 1966, the KGB sent Major Yuri Nikolaevich Loginov, posing as a Canadian businessman of Lithuanian heritage, to South Africa. Loginov established his cover business and began laying plans to immigrate to the United States. He carried a small coin concealing a tiny piece of soft film that contained his personal code, a list of radio frequencies, call signs, a listening schedule, a summary of instructions for meetings with other KGB agents, and a brief compendium of his legend. Footnote 158. The concealment, an Indian rupee coin, had been machined at the Moscow workshops of the KGB's OTU, Operative Technical Unit. Footnote 159. This spy coin was constructed from 2 rupee coins machined to fit together. When the 2 sides were joined, the resulting coin appeared unaltered, a nearly perfect illusion. Identical in design and construction to the hollow nickel provided to the FBI in 1953, the coin could only be opened using a tiny needle, which was inserted into a small hole in the face of the coin near the milled edge of side 1. The needle was used to separate the 2 sides, making access to the coin's secret precise, but the opening process was slow. This type of spy coin worked perfectly for Russian spies, although it would not have allowed the quick access required in a magic performance. Other intelligence services also machined concealment coins to be used covertly for storing or transporting cipher material and agent communication details. Most coins for clandestine operations employed threaded openings which screwed together and were reusable by the agent. In rare circumstances, when the coin might be subjected to extra scrutiny, a one-time non-threaded coin was constructed, loaded, and sealed like a dead drop. Its weight with the loaded microfilm was identical to an unmodified coin, but opening required special knowledge. For example, a temperature-sensitive coin seal required mild heating in a cup of coffee or tea to release the glue or low melting alloy that secured the 2 pieces together. Footnote 160. This example of a coin concealment was created by the authors from an OTS 50th anniversary souvenir coin. The interior cavity can be accessed by unscrewing the inner face of the coin, courtesy of the authors. The process of creating threaded and screwed together coins required a machine shop lathe to mill out the inside of the coin and cut threads on the male and female sections. The face inside the rim would be hollowed out on one coin, leaving the bottom and rim, and the other coin on the back side and rim would be removed for dead space and threads. While in theory only 2 coins are needed to make one modified coin, in reality at least 6 were usually required because of the difficulty in getting both sides to match up when screwed closed. Machinists prefer thicker coins with wide rims and an inside borderline, since the seam where the 2 sections fitted together would be invisible to the naked eye. Depending on space and what material was removed, weight was added to match the weight of the unmodified coin. A threaded coin was opened by applying downward pressure on the face of the coin and turning right or left depending on which type of thread was cut. When used by agents for storage or transport of microfilm, finely cut threads fit more snugly and were less likely to come loose during carrying or handling. The pieces fit together so well that some officers and their agents had difficulty applying sufficient finger pressure to open them. In that case, a piece of sticky tape placed on the bottom of the fingers made it possible to grasp the face of the coin and open it. On display at the C.I.A. Museum in its Langley, Virginia headquarters is an Eisenhower silver dollar described as follows on the museum's website, footnote 161. Silver dollar hollow container. This coin may appear to be an Eisenhower silver dollar, but it is really a concealment device. It was used to hide messages on film so they could be sent secretly. Because it looks like an ordinary pocket change, it is almost undetectable. Footnote 162. The origin of the CIA's silver dollar container is uncertain, but the method of quickly accessing its hidden cavity makes it an unlikely candidate for concealing messages. Footnote 163. The ability to open the coin by simply squeezing at spots near the edge makes it insecure for concealing secret messages because the sensitive contents might be revealed accidentally or prematurely, and contrasts with other CIA concealments that require a planned effort for opening. Footnote 164. The design of the CIA silver dollar, for example, employs a feature that is more desirable to a magician: a large cavity that can be opened easily during a performance. In this case, it appears that Mulholland transferred the fruits of his magic to the CIA. Magician and author Ben Robinson's research into John Mulholland's papers discovered squeezing a spot near the edge of the coin caused it to open. Illustration by Phil Frank. The clever dope coin that Mulholland machined for the agency in 1953 is made from a 1921 silver dollar and opens when the word peace is gently pushed between thumb and forefinger. Mulholland charged $15 in machine fees when he submitted his bill for the presentation of this highly secret tool. Apparently, Mulholland was no stranger to this device. He'd been working on such a prop since his early 20s. Footnote 165. The method described by Robinson for opening the Mulholland dope coin is identical to that for opening the CIA's silver dollar hollow container. If usable at all, the coin's large cavity and quick accessibility would have been better suited for the covert delivery of powders, one of the major topics in Mulholland's manual. The principles of magic learned from Mulholland and his fellow conjurers like Houdini and Maskelyne, combined with 21st century technology, will continue to influence espionage tricks. Even the ultimate tool for both magicians and intelligent operations, an invisibility cloak, now appears possible. Scientific experiments have confirmed that light waves can be bent to make objects invisible to the naked eye or appear to be something else. Footnote 166. The concept of invisibility is not new and was popularized in 1897 by H.G. Wells' science fiction novella, The Invisible Man. Footnote 167. Stage magicians in the 20th century regularly made objects, people, and even elephants disappear, as illusionist Jim Steinmeier chronicled in Hiding the Elephant, how magicians invented the impossible and learned to disappear. Footnote 168. Because such techniques employed mirrors and other special apparatuses and were performed only on stage, the illusion had limited application to espionage. The effect of an electronic cloak of invisibility on clandestine operations would be sweeping. Sensors, listening devices, cameras, and data intercept devices could be hidden in plain sight. Dead drops could be serviced with impunity and electronic identity transfers performed on command. New technologies, however amazing, provide only additional methods for creating deceptions and illusions. The goals and objectives of both the spies and magicians remain unchanged. Footnote 169. A copy of the only known example of Mulholland's two original manuals, overlooked during the destruction of MKUltra files in 1973, was discovered by the authors in 2007. Subsequently, master illustrator Phil Frank used the poor-quality photocopies of Mulholland's original photographs as the basis for painstakingly redrawing the illustrations. Each image details the exacting movements and techniques used by Mulholland to teach the CIA tricksters. These images, along with the retyped original manual's text, are reprinted together here for the first time. John Mulholland was a master magician showman, courtesy of the authors. Magic is the art of creating illusions agreeably. Crest from Mulholland's Book of Magic, 1963, courtesy of the authors. And that concludes the opening to the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. This is Anyman reminding you that you have the power. You are the power. Use it wisely and use it well.